All right, welcome to Inside Arizona. This time we are doing a bit of a news roundup as we have some updates in Arizona regarding school funding. So let's just kind of give everybody some feedback here on how this whole situation with Arizona school funding with this news article.
What does that mean? Well, this all dates back to 2017 when Glendale Elementary and other districts filed suit against the state over its funding formula for school construction. When we toured this school a few years ago, we saw cracks in stairs, the foundation, even in the walls that were so bad that you could actually see light through it.
That's just one school.
Yeah, just one school, but it's not alone. Schools throughout the state have been in such poor maintenance. So the judge gave this ruling that the state legislature was not properly funding them, and now 8 months later, he has given a specific order to properly fund the school constructions and maintenance. But he unfortunately did give a 90-day pause, which we can see right down here.
Mm-hmm.
Because the Arizona Republicans are, of course, going to appeal this, which is unfortunate. Yeah. Well, you're a lawyer, Mike. Do you think they have any chance in appeal?
Well, they will certainly appeal. And this ruling comes from a Maricopa County Superior Court. So not only is there the appeals court above them, then there's also the Arizona State Supreme Court. So they have two levels of appeal that they could potentially exhaust if they want to delay this matter, which I guarantee you they absolutely do. Because the scale of this thing doesn't just go back to 2017. That's when this particular lawsuit was filed, is 2017. Mm-hmm. But the underfunding of our school infrastructure, goes back into the late 90s easily, if not even before that. And so we're looking at a scale of several times the actual school budget right now. I mean, we could be looking up to, between all the different funds that take care of school infrastructure and maintenance, we could be looking up to $8 or $9 billion in shortfalls of what should have been expended in order to keep schools up to a standard and to equalize funding between school systems and what was actually allocated. This is a banger, as they say. This is not going to be resolved in 8 months, which is the horizon that the Superior Court has given the state legislature to correct this matter. But that, in order to meet that, which I guarantee you they don't want to and won't, they would have to raise taxes this year substantially in order to be able to afford to backfill any of those funds whatsoever, because they have consistently over the past 20 years cut at Arizona state revenues in order to provide tax cuts and tax giveaways to the wealthiest here in Arizona, culminating now, of course, in a flat tax of 4.5% here in Arizona, whereas we used to have a reasonably graduated income tax. And so I don't see this being resolved in the near term at all. First thing that will happen is Warren Peterson and the other leaders in the MAGA caucus in the state legislature will try and kick this down the road by exhausting their appeals.
Absolutely. And just to be clear for our audience, what the judge wrote is that the funding system needs to not have substantial disparities between districts based on the ability to raise funds through bonds and capital overrides, property wealth, or local bonding capacity. So really, this seems like it would help the rural areas the most that don't have a super wealthy population, but yet still the GOP are, just not willing to help support those rural communities with their public schools.
Yeah, and any rhetoric that they put forward that they are actually supporting rural communities is absolute bunkum. I mean, you look at all their rural policies, water policies, economic development policies, the cost of living, transportation, education, all that stuff that is core responsibility for the state has been gutted over the past 30 years in deference to their main policy goal, which is to reduce taxes until they can drown the baby in the bathtub, as Grover Norquist famously put it.
Yeah, and just to be clear as well, it is in our Constitution that it is the state legislature's responsibility to
Mhm.
make sure that there is a uh, uniform and general public school system, and that it is also the maintenance of those buildings belong to the state legislature. So it is their responsibility to make sure that this is being done. It's not on the local governments, the school districts or the cities to necessarily pay for all of these costs.
Yeah.
So I believe you have read at least some of this order. Does it have any teeth to it? Because that would be my concern.
Well, yes, absolutely. I mean, the the state courts are going to be really, really hard put to try to prescribe a solution for the state legislature
Mm-hmm.
because this is an extremely complex issue and it's evolved in state law over the years, and addressing it is going to be an institutional reform process, not just you have to spend X dollars, but you also have to put in place the state laws that structure how you look at and evaluate and test whether a school meets minimum standards for the safety and well-being of the kids there. But then you also have to come up with a mechanism whereby you equalize your infrastructural spending across disparate districts that have much different bonding capacities, for instance. And then finally, you have to make sure that the basic funding mechanism itself doesn't introduce disparities between those, less affluent and rural school districts and more affluent urban districts that can have a lot more funding capacity. So it's a really complex issue, and it's going to take the legislature a lot of work to get it done. But the bottom line is, you're probably never going to get there with an intransigent state legislature whose main purpose and main focus of their electoral appeal is always and has been for decades lower taxes, no matter what hell or high water, lower taxes. And so I question whether or not it's going to even happen at all with any kind of reasonable time frame, unless there's a change in the leadership at the legislature, i.e., Democrats take charge, and they will have the will and the political pressure on them from parents and teachers, PTOs, local school districts, local school boards, and the teachers unions in order to actually get this done. Whereas, the MAGA faction really could not care at all about what any of those interest groups might say about the matter, and they'll just simply, continue doing what they're doing and have done successfully for the past 30 years or so, while in control of the legislature, and that's cut taxes and devil take the hindmost, and the hindmost being our poor school districts and our most disadvantaged students are gonna eat the brunt of that, and they don't care. I mean, this is symptomatic not only of their general approach to public education, which is hostile, but also, I mean, their current priorities, which is not to properly fund and incentivize greatness in our public school system. It's to take and denude as much funding from the public school system as possible, which they're doing through the ESA vouchers, which, again, they refuse to rein in. They refuse to put any kind of reasonable limits on, to the point that educational advocates here in Arizona have had to resort to actually running a citizen's petition in order to put some reasonable limits on that ESA program, because it's bankrupting our public schools.
Yeah, this is just complete maliciousness from the top to the bottom with how our schools have been. Like you mentioned, this started back in 1994. There was a lawsuit then, and now 2017 there was a lawsuit. Mm-hmm. And if the GOP continues to be in power, there will probably be another lawsuit in 20, 30 years.
I guarantee it.
And all the while, it's just to, again, the GOP playbook is to get elected and then break the government and then just say, oh, everything must be privatized. And that's what they want. They want all the schools in Arizona to probably be privatized. But the ESA voucher does not pay entirely for a school district. leaves a little bit left over for the individual family, from what I understand, to pay some if the tuition is high enough, of course. So this means that a bunch of wealthy families are going to send their students to high quality schools.
Yeah,
And
well, ESAs
because,
have nothing to do with public schools whatsoever, except it comes from the
yes,
same pot of funding
yes,
that public schools get. So the
right,
more you
right.
put toward ESAs and the private schools that accept that ESA voucher, the less you're putting into operations of your public school.
Right. What I'm saying is that there's going to be a segregation of poor people going to either low quality private schools or public schools that are super underfunded, and wealthy individuals sending their kids to high quality private schools, and they're going to get a discount on those private schools from taxpayer funds, even though they are wealthy.
Yeah, that's absolutely an accurate statement of the goal of the MAGA faction as regards education in Arizona, and in fact across the nation, because there are several states that are flirting with the idea of doing what Arizona has done, as well as several that went at the same time or before us, and the results have pretty much been the same all across the board. Whenever this is adopted, the amount of resources available for public schools plunges, and that's by design. That's not an accident.
Absolutely. We have another article here I want to bring up just to tie it back into our locality, which is the Tucson area. So here we have the Tucson Unified School District. So the main thing I wanted to bring up with this one is that buses are in fact included in the judge's ruling as part of school maintenance. And that is, of course, incredibly important because kids have to go from their house to the school, and ideally they need to have good vehicles. And it's just again, like when you let something like maintenance go bad, it costs more to fix things than it is to prevent. It's always cheaper to prevent things.
Yeah.
And so having an aging fleet of school buses is just going to make it much more costly on these schools, which means there's going to have less funds to do things that actually help students learning or to prepare them later in life. And eventually it could even put it on for parents to where they have to bring their kids to schools, which puts pressure on working families to where they have to be available at, when the school starts to drop their kid off at a reasonable time and then get to their work and then be able to pick them up after, or the school has to have something for those kids to do afterwards. In fact, I've had a friend who works at the library system in Pima County, and he's told me that sometimes some students will just show up at the library afterwards, and it's not, the library's responsibility to be an after-schools program. Mm-hmm. But the school themselves cannot afford an after-school program directly.
Oh yeah, I mean the operational aspect of it and the pay that we're paying. All the staff in our public schools is atrocious. But this particular issue hits home in a couple of ways. Let me get a little bit more granular. First of all, the scale of the underfunding. We're talking about hundreds of millions of dollars per year of what is actually needed. And there's a mechanism in place whereby the schools evaluate their maintenance needs, their infrastructural needs, their need for new schools, and they put that through a board to the state legislature, and on a regular for the past almost 30 years. The disparity between what they ask for and what they get appropriated by the legislature has been mismatched to the tune of hundreds of millions of dollars a year. So overall, we're talking about literally billions of dollars in delayed maintenance, in schools that are being shorted for the kind of structural upgrades that are needed to meet minimum standards. And a lot of our schools don't meet those minimum standards and best practices that have been identified by experts across the country as being important for children's ability to learn in those facilities. For instance, let me give you a handful. Toilets that are constantly broken, that, the fixtures are broken. There's black mold in the building, and making it a safety hazard for the kids. CO2 levels in like 90% of the schools that they've looked at have been excessive. I mean, to the point where they were even as much as 6 times the recommended standards. And, you know, if you I don't know if anybody's ever experienced CO2 poisoning, but you get a headache, you can't think clearly, your mental capacity is diminished, you know, you just feel cranky and horrible, you can't focus, you know, and this is the conditions under which we're expecting our kids to learn. That's insane. Not only that,
absolutely.
It also includes the equipment in the schools, the equipment that's available to support those kids' educational needs. It used to be back at the beginning of this lawsuit in 2017, the computer ratio that was recommended nationally was 8 kids to 1 computer. Now the standard is 1 to 1 because, you know, these kids can't effectively work without a computer in these modern classrooms because so much of the stuff is done online. So much of the stuff, even in the classroom instruction, is based on, you know, internet and computer-based instructional aids. And none of those standards are being met. And that's just like a handful. There are a heck of a lot more standards that are important to let our kids, you know, be healthy in those schools and be safe in those schools. One more, for instance, is safety standards around security. You know, you always hear from MAGA politicians whenever there's a school shooting, oh, let's arm the teachers or let's up armor the schools or something, as if that was costless. In fact, our schools do not meet minimum standards almost universally, except in the very wealthiest districts, for school security and active shooting safety implementation for, like, you know, gates and reinforced doors and, you know, safe rooms and, you know, communication systems to be able to coordinate a response to an active shooting situation. So we're sending sending kids into schools that are killing zones, basically. And the Republicans don't care about that either. At the same time, they're still pushing more and more guns closer and closer to campus and more easy access to wackadoodles who want to harm our children. So that's just some of the things that are going deficient in our schools currently. You know, I really can't hold out a lot of hope that if the MAGA Republicans hold on to their control, that any of this will be addressed anytime soon.
Yeah, it is not ideal. And even this article here mentions, like, Amphitheater, which is another school district in Pima County, has had some mold.
Yeah.
So
I live in Amphitheater. Yeah. And it's actually a good school district. It's doing fairly well, but even they can't keep up with the maintenance needs and structural needs and safety needs for the kids in their schools, because the money is just not there. They request it, and continually the legislature says, no, we don't care about that.
And again, it's just completely fiscally irresponsible, because if they were just funded in the first place, there wouldn't be the mold issue as well. And, like, there's this quote as well in this article from Representative Nancy Gutierrez, a Democrat in the state legislature. She's dealt with districts not having money for air conditioning. Yeah. Don't forget, their teachers are employees. They are adults. Just imagine working in a building without proper AC in Arizona. That just sounds not right, not fair at all.
It can be deadly, is what it could be.
Yeah, absolutely.
It can certainly reduce, you know, the outcomes of the kids if they're not, you know, comfortable enough to actually be able to learn. I mean, if you're sitting in a classroom that's over 100 degrees, you're not learning shit, guaranteed.
Yeah, absolutely. And, like, we've definitely discussed that this is very malicious by the GOP, that their goal is to segregate based off of wealth and make sure only wealthy families are able to get their kids a good education. But it's also, to me, it harkens to another issue in politics here in Arizona, but also across the country, in that it's very easy for politicians to campaign on eliminating waste and fraud, abuse, et cetera, but it's harder to do that in person. So what do? They nickel and dime every single agency they can, and then it results in stuff like this. Suddenly they don't have the money to do important things or things that they were doing, and then there's long-term consequences because of that. Like how, again, there's mold here or maintenance issues with, you know, broken toilets or cracks in the walls. I mean, could you imagine if
And
a
worse.
building collapsed, like if a
Mm-hmm.
school building collapsed?
Mm-hmm.
Like,
Yeah,
it
they're putting our kids in harm's way by doing this, and proving that they really don't care
yeah.
about our children or our future. The MAGA philosophy is exceedingly reactionary. It's not a governing
Mhm.
philosophy. It's not a way to run a state. It's a way to destroy and undermine and loot a state and a federal government, for that matter. So yeah, it's just not a good faith argument to say, oh, you just need to tighten your belt. You can't tighten your belt to the tune of billions of dollars of deferred and neglected maintenance, and the inability of our schools to be able to build new facilities, to be able to provide new services, to be able to provide environments for our kids to learn most effectively, according to all the latest research. And by latest, I mean the last 30 years. Research on how to do best practices in terms of facilities in order to promote children's performance in schools. It's just it's completely reckless. And this is not only our elementary schools, but also our colleges and universities are also having deferred maintenance issues to the tune of hundreds of millions of dollars.
Yeah, I mean, part of that is the university's own fault, especially when it comes to U of A and their finance situation. But turning back to this discussion, what can the Democrats actually do if they were to take control of the state legislature? What would you want to see them do exactly?
Yeah, it's a really complex question. I mean, the first thing would be to convene hearings on a good faith basis to actually get input from the school districts, a variety of school districts, school administrators, experts in infrastructure for education, and get some best practices in place by looking at other states that are doing this well and competently over the long-term horizon, and design a system that actually inspects the schools. We don't do that. We're required to do that, but we're not doing that. That actually equalizes funding amongst districts that have different bonding potential. We're not doing that. That actually has a funding formula that doesn't itself create disparities between rural and urban districts. And we're not doing that either. And so it's going to be, like I said, a long process of learning in this state how best to approach this problem, to restructure the government in order to keep an eye on this ball and not let it get behind, and then having the willpower and the priority in our budgets in how we spend our money and how we tax our people, so that we can actually fulfill these promises that are made in our state constitution to our kids and to our future. That's not an easy process. It's not a short process. It's a long process and a difficult process, and it's going to take goodwill on the part of the state legislators who undertake this task. You simply can't do it with people who are of bad faith and are kicking and screaming and trying to sue their way out of responsibility at every step of the line, every step down the line. It's never going to work that way.
Absolutely. Nancy, she wants to cap the voucher program. Do you think that's a good idea, or should the voucher program just be done away with by the Democrats?
I think there's political support out there to eliminate the ESA universal vouchers. However, the approach that polls best and polls most strongly is to put just reasonable guardrails on the program, to actually review what parents are claiming as educational expenses, to make sure they're educational expenses, to say that if you make hundreds of $1,000s a year, you're not eligible for this money. You can afford to send your kid to your private school and pay for it yourself. Those sorts of reasonable reforms are ones that the Republicans have been offered year after year after year since they started this program, and have refused. They have gone to the mat. They have threatened to shut down the government if these matters are breached every year. And so, the way that we have forward is either the voters decide enough is enough and put the Democrats in charge, or go directly to the voters, where over 60% of them sometimes up to 70 or 80% of them, depending on the particular measure you're talking about in the citizens initiative that's being worked on by Save Our Schools Arizona, had it's just overwhelming support for these reforms.
Absolutely. I mean, I'm always going to say that Democrats should not be pre-compromising. I'd always rather them take a maximalist stance before starting negotiations than pre-compromising beforehand. But also because Democrats have offered this over and over and over again, I'm also wanting to kind of just punish the GOP. Like, hey, we've offered you stuff. Now we got elected. We're in power. You guys have no say. So we're going to take a bit more of a maximalist stance. We wouldn't have done this have you just been willing to work with us a couple of years ago.
Yeah.
Right?
Well, I think my main problem with let's get back at them is that in order to do that, we'd have to continue the undemocratic and unfair procedural practices that have been going on in our legislature for years and years and years. And I think ultimately that results in bad public policy. It results in budgets that don't reflect the priorities of the state as a whole. And it results in bad legislation that's not the result of, compromise by interest factions, but in fact are just like ideological bell ringers that, don't actually move the ball in terms of public policy. So I would be perfectly happy were Democrats to take over. They just go back to regular order, go back to, actually listening to what people say, actually having hearings that are meaningful, actually, taking the budget into the relevant committees and have full hearings on the requested budget, rather than sitting in a back room in a smoke-filled room, as it were, negotiating with the governor, just between the governor and whatever little faction is has the most leverage in the legislature. And that's how it's done now. And Katie has unfortunately not pushed back on that, but has allowed that practice to continue, much to her detriment, I have to say. The budgets that we have are reflective of the fact that there is not enough public input. There's not enough compromise. There's not enough time to build the coalitions required in order to stop these kind of, malfeasance and misfeasance, like not funding our school infrastructural needs to the tune of billions of dollars.
Yeah, it's absolutely shameful that the budget is all being done in back rooms and that it's not being done in regular order. But also just for some clarity for listeners, in Arizona, there's no filibuster. If the Democrats take over both chambers, they just have to compromise within themselves. They don't necessarily need any GOP votes. So yeah, having that return to public order would be good. And then, making sure that the Democrats can all work together and find the compromise that they would be entitled to. But ideally, I would be happier with a more maximalist stance, just to kind of tell the GOP, like, it's kind of like a prisoner's dilemma type thing is how I view it, where if there isn't going to be a compromise or if they're not going to work together, then the way in a repeated game of prisoner's dilemma, I believe the optimal thing is to punish eventually and then go back immediately to trying to work together. And then if that doesn't get the other player to start working together, then it's just punish, which is ideally not how politics should work at all. But that's just like how the prisoner dilemma game works out in a repeated environment. Sure. I just can't imagine how else to get the GOP to be more sensible if there isn't going to be any sort of punishment for them. If they can just do their maximalist stance and then everything be accepted afterwards or not really removed.
Yeah. Well, one of the things we can look at if we actually capture the majority is not just, dealing with issues like, the massive underfunding of our public schools, but also things like reform of our electoral system that would allow us to be more responsive to constituents, to respond more toward a moderate viewpoint, if you will. Things like, getting rid of our current electoral system in favor of something like ranked choice voting or
absolutely.
That encourages structurally cooperation between the parties and not factionalism and, reducing your base to as narrow as you can and the most fanatic that you can in order to get through the primary and then gerrymander your way out of any kind of general election. That's what's harming our politics more than anything else.
Right.
And I'm perfectly okay with outcomes that are determined democratically. I mean, not big D Democrat Party wise, but through democracy, actual democracy and deliberation. That's what I want to see. Not necessarily any kind of predetermined outcomes that happen to be ideological whipping boys of any particular faction at any time, but things that are actually responsive to the electorate and their needs.
Absolutely, yes. Electoral reform would go great, and it just kind of shows that a lot of these issues are interconnected, such as another one we've mentioned before, that Arizona has a flat tax. Could you explain to our audience a bit of how taxes work in Arizona, specifically when it comes to changing taxes?
Yeah, back in the I think it was late 70s, early 80s, we were foolish enough as citizens to pass referenda, i.e., the legislature sent a ballot measure to be put on the ballot before Arizona voters that would basically make it easy to cut taxes, but very, very hard to raise them. So basically, you have to have a supermajority of the state legislature to raise any revenues, but you only have to have a majority to lower revenues, to cut taxes, and sort of created a one-way ratchet downward in Arizona tax receipts because the GOP could just keep cutting taxes, and we really can't do anything about raising them. So raising revenues is an incredibly hard process in Arizona, requiring a supermajority, and cutting taxes is easy. And so that's put us in this situation where, despite the fact that they control a bare majority in the state legislature, the Republicans have been able to consistently cut taxes with that bare majority as long as they have the governorship. And for instance, when Ducey was our governor for 2 terms, he made a pledge that he would cut taxes every year of his governorship. And he fulfilled that pledge, ending up with taxes at a flat rate of 4.5%, which is simply inadequate to fund the actual needs of the people of Arizona, including, infrastructure, healthcare, education, all those priorities all those things that are primarily the responsibility and the expense of state government. So that's gotten us into a position where we're in chronic deficit. And there's really no way out of it except a supermajority in the state legislature. So even if Democrats take back the state legislature and the state Senate and hold the governorship, we would need to get a supermajority together to be able to actually raise revenues. Some of the things we can do is close tax loopholes. So basically, exemptions from taxes, those have been ruled by the courts to not actually be an increase in tax rates. So we could probably get a heck of a lot of the way toward where we want to be tax-wise simply by closing a lot of those tax benefits that mostly flow to special interests who have the wealth and power to be able to lobby for them. They generally don't impact or benefit the general populace. But in order to fix that, eventually we're going to have another referenda to the state constitution to ask voters to reverse that and say, hey, we need fairness in taxes, and that means it should be a majority to both raise and lower taxes. And I think if we do a good enough job of education, we can tie some of these big deficiencies in our healthcare system, in our educational system, to the chronic underfunding that resulted from this one-way ratchet. And I think Arizona voters would see the light and reverse that out eventually. It might take a couple of tries even, but I think eventually voters would find that to be unfair if they knew about it. And not a lot of people do. Yeah,
it is definitely crazy that something 50 years ago is creating problems today like this. But it really does show the limits that the Democrats have. They have the options as far as, getting the money the schools need for their improvements, just for their buildings, not even for their educational stuff that they may or not want to do. Their options are to limit the voucher program, which both of you and I are in agreement of some sort of limits at the very least. Yeah. Or just closing tax loopholes. That's it, to try to create a couple $2 billion for the schools in Arizona. Mm-hmm. That sounds like it's going to be easier said than done, to be honest. Especially if we take into effect that thanks to HR1, thanks to Republicans like Biggs and Siscomani, there's going to be like a 200 million hole in the state budget where a bunch of people are going to get kicked off due to kicked off of a SNAP, food stamps. But that's a bit of a tangential thing, but it does affect the state budget in 2027.
It is, but you have to recognize that even at our current funding levels, we're still like 48th or 49th or 50th among states for per pupil state spending. That includes both capital and operational costs, that paying wages and keeping the school open and buying instruction material and we're at the bottom of the heap, and the Republicans have put us here, and now they've got us in unsafe, structurally unsound, unhealthy, and completely deficient school facilities. They've been chronically underfunding us for so long, and it's something that we're going to have to work for years in order to redress.
Absolutely. It's a lot of these things, like the constitutions in all the states. It's a lot of it is based on good faith effort, good faith belief in the individuals. But to be fair, the Republicans do not want to govern. They do not.
Yeah. I mean, Republicanism at this point has just become nihilism and fascism. I just can't see it any other way. They don't have a governing philosophy other than smash the government, which, we simply can't do great things together unless we have well-functioning, well-designed governments that actually, deliver democratic results. I mean, not big D, but small d, responsive to the needs of the people. And that has become impossible in our current situation. That's why so many people are losing faith in government and finding that, government's not responsive. It doesn't listen to what they say. No matter what a politician says, you always get bad outcomes. There's been a crisis of faith in our ability to govern ourselves that I think is extremely damaging to the American project.
Absolutely. And education is the forefront of that, because
100%.
How can you expect a polity to make good decisions if they don't have the education to understand the situation? And in today's modern world, issues are so complex. Complex.
And we've recognized this for hundreds of years. I mean, Jefferson, founded the first university, one of the first universities, the University of Virginia, 2.5 decades ago, because he recognized that,
2.5 centuries, you mean?
Repeatedly, you have to have an educated populace. The founding fathers are very clear on this. You have to have an educated populace if you're going to have a self-governing populace.
Absolutely. Is there anything else you would like to add to this, or is that a good place to end this?
I think the end of it is that, the voters shouldn't rely on the courts to fix
Absolutely.
this. Because the courts can't. The courts can't. Yeah. The courts can point out that the emperor is naked. That the state legislature, specifically the MAGA faction in control of the state legislature, is not following our Constitution, is constitutionally harming our children and our future. They can recognize that. They can call it out. But it's up to us to do something about it with your votes.
Maybe the courts could start charging every Republican state legislature for each day that they ignore the order.
Yeah, they would just build it into the cost of doing business, I guarantee you. And they'd find a way not to pay it themselves.
Yeah, they'd find a way to increase the pay of the state legislatures. That would be funny. That would be super funny.
Yeah. What has to be done is we have to break this malaise. We have to break this nihilism and fascism that's taken over our government in order to fix these deep-rooted problems that the court has just basically pointed out and detailed in great detail. I mean, there's this 114 pages.
It's not showing up.
It's blending into my background. Nonetheless, here's the opinion. Oh, I can see it now. It's 114 pages. It is a doorstop of a ruling laying out just how deficient the state legislature has been in meeting these needs and these constitutional requirements for the past 20, 30 years.
Absolutely. And people, you need to look up who your state representative is, who your state senator is, and see who's running against them if they're a Republican and help out the Democratic candidate. Of course, look into the Democratic candidates, make sure that they are good candidates. The primary is just kind of beginning. We still got a good 3 or 4 months before the primary. So
Absolutely.
make sure we have the best candidate to win the general.
I even have an easier way to heuristic bringing back government to center on the needs of Arizona citizens. And that's simply, if you're a traditional Republican, a fiscal conservative, a national security Republican, a pro-business Republican, you can't vote for this party anymore because it really doesn't stand for those things anymore. Nationally, that alliance is broken. The people who are concerned about national security no longer have a place in the Republican Party. The people who are concerned about business environment no longer have a place or a table in the Republican Party. And the people who are concerned about fiscal prudence and long-term sustainability of our society and our government no longer have a place at the table in this modern Republican Party. This is a fascist and nihilistic party. It's a revolutionary party trying to destroy what we have built over the past 250 years. It's no longer the Republicans that you recognize from 30, 40 years ago.
Which is such a shame, because the Republican Party had such great leaders. They had Lincoln, they had Roosevelt, even Eisenhower to a degree, right? Like they had so many good leaders.
I would take a Bush at this point.
That is, I mean, are you sure about that, given what's happening in the Middle East?
Not. Okay, but still, even comparing to somebody like Bush or McCain, these Republicans are no longer Republicans. I mean, they hoot hell when they hear those names, because they recognize that those people aren't with them or wouldn't be with them if they were still around. I mean,
Reagan probably wouldn't be with them.
I mean, they went to the trouble of naming an elementary school the Ronald Reagan Elementary School, and one of the case studies that is in this case decision is a maintenance deficiency there with the roof and HVAC system to the tune of hundreds of thousands of dollars at Ronald Reagan Elementary School. They can't even keep the schools that are named after their supposed heroes adequately funded and in good working condition for our kids.
Well, if they name a school after Donald Trump and it's in disrepair, at least that will be on brand.
Yes, absolutely, 100%.
All right.